Now, for more analysis on this rand dollar manipulation scandal, we are now joined by legal analyst Mpumelelo Zikalala. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Mpumelelo. Now, it's 8 years after the initial investigation began on the colluding of banks in manipulating the rand. For 6 years, trading about $1 trillion a day amongst themselves. How dire is the situation for South Africa?
It is very dire. If you look at it in the bigger scheme of things, that individuals are going to say, I don't have a house today, I don't have a car, I don't have a job, and certainly my life has been turned upside down due to this manipulation. When we trade with the rand-dollar exchange, for example, we change out of the pretext that everything that happens is going to depend on the innocent sequence of events that are taking place, not on individuals who actively manipulate how the rand is supposed to be and who stand to gain millions or even trillions of rands at the end of the day, just because the punishing mechanisms which are available to us, like you have heard your guest saying earlier, are not enough to be severe enough or to provide that particular sting which is required in order to deter them from engaging in this type of practices. And which is why you've seen this matter going on since 2008 up until now. There's been no resolution. And why we are finding very little or no local banks that have actually admitted to any wrongdoing, because they know at the end of the day that the longer they drag this particular point, the much money they would have been able to make. And it's certainly very difficult to prosecute them due to the lack of the prosecuting tools which are not up to task to deal with the type of manipulation and the setbacks that took place caused by them, by the way.
I want to Mpumelelo a little later on to discuss those tools and some of those ramifications that these banks could possibly face. But in 2016, former President Zuma raised his suspicion around the manipulation, and he received a scornful backlash, and instead he was blamed for the volatile and negative performance of the rand at the time. Should this manipulation be proven, could he have legal recourse?
Not necessarily. You see, the minute you go to court and you say you want legal recourse, you're basically saying, I want to be put in a position that I would have been had that particular transgression not have taken place. So if you come as a president or the former president, you are then saying you must be put back into that particular position, which cannot happen according to our rules and the constitution and the voting mechanisms that we have. But the only thing that you can basically wish for or ask is for an apology, and for those particular words to be withdrawn. And it can't be taken away, because when strictly speaking in the occurrences of what's happening in the real world, there are instances in which presidents are going to misbehave, and that particular currency of that country is going to have a huge knock-on effect. It's not always that when the rand dollar or the rand pound goes up and down due to manipulation. There are instances in which there will be honest trading, let me call it that takes place, and some of it is fueled by political news and political backings which takes place. So it would be very difficult for him to go to court and say, put me in a position that I would have been had this particular process had not taken place. What I was expecting, though, is that maybe the ruling party and other political parties will ride on this particular fact and say, look at what is happening now. It's not because that when South Africa is failing when it comes to the rand currency, it's because of the political or the statements that you are making. It was a concerted effort which was being done by individuals that were standing to gain on a regular basis huge amounts of money. And by the way, it is some of the individuals that come from the ruling party which were absolving the banks and saying that it has nothing to do with no manipulation that takes place. And we've heard nothing from them, in which they come back now and say, this is what the process has been. We apologize, and you are not going to say that thing again. Maybe they are waiting up until the tribunal finishes its job and a sexual finding is actually made. And then on that basis, they will come back and say, we apologize, South Africa.
And speaking of those apologies, I mean, earlier on, the EFF is calling for the recovery of funds. We know that many South Africans during the time lost jobs, lost homes, lost cars. Some companies which were exporting goods out of the country were also quite affected. Could there be a class action lawsuit that could be instigated against these banks by those South Africans who bore the brunt of that economic time?
So certainly the door is open, but it would be filled with a lot of difficulties because the technical requirements that you have to comply with. The first one is that before a class action is launched, we need to launch an application requesting permission for the class action to be launched. Now, that can take a couple of years, maybe it takes 3 years, and only after 3 years after you've been given the green light to institute this class action, you then come back. And the problem that you are going to find is a causal connection from the harm that you've suffered and linking it directly to the rand manipulation. So if it's not clear, if you're not going to have a certain Zikalala saying that due to the manipulation which took place on the 15th of January in 2003, for example, my house is no longer there, my car is no longer there, I can have a clear connection lines from your behavior as the bank to what the rand is now taking place, specific to me as an individual who's suing you. Hence, I'm requesting that you provide or you engage in this process, you put me back in a position I would have been had that manipulation not have taken place. What can happen though, which I think is somewhat what is deterring the South African banks from accepting these administrative fines which are being accepted from foreign banks. If we look at the rules which govern how these prosecutions are supposed to take place, there are instances in which the Act then says, even though you come back and you say, yes, I admit to my guilt, I admit to my wrongdoing, it may, or the wrongful part of it may even extend to directors, and directors may be extended or even fined. So you will find those bank CEOs saying that I do not want to wear that orange overall. So on that basis, let's fight it with all the might that we have and make sure that I do not wear any orange overalls on this particular matter. And also it speaks to the tools that we have in order to fight this manipulation. Now, when the Competition Act was written, yes, they anticipated that something like this would occur, but I think primarily it was done to protect us from unscrupulous traders within certain markets. For example, bread cartels, milk cartels, or even egg cartels. But it wasn't created specifically for banks. Now, the difficulty in which we're going to find is that there's a tool to prosecute which is available at your disposal, but it is not that effective to such an extent that it's going to bring back the type of justice in which we are looking for. I think that's the problem they are facing currently, and they're saying, let's push all we can, make sure that we get a ruling from the tribunal, and then we'll take it from there.
So we're most likely not going to see actual individuals take accountability and be convicted for these crimes.
I think it would be very difficult, and which is why even the banks are fighting, because the banks are not only fighting on the merits of the case, they're even fighting on the powers of the tribunal to decide these particular matters. So they're saying, you are not supposed to be even discussing these things. If this thing is supposed to be handled, make it go to the High Court, where the High Court is inherent jurisdiction, and it is only then in which this particular process would have been taken. But then if you look at it from a rational point of view, the Competition Tribunal was created for those particular instances. It was created for instances in which you have a monopoly, which is rigging the system, for lack of a better word, for their own interests. So in order to protect us as members of the public, you need a forum which is going to be able to dispose of these matters as quickly as possible, and powers have been conferred upon them. It's just that we haven't developed these particular powers to take care of all the cartels that may be there, all the manipulation that may be there, including manipulation that takes place within the financial sector.
So speaking of that manipulation and the powers that be that possibly then could take action against us, I mean, we know that currency manipulation can be deemed a violation in regards to the International Monetary Fund. What consequences could these banks then face with the IMF instead?
Again, you see, when you come to the financial sector, yes, there's punishment, but the sting is very little. So other than your fines which are going to be issued, nothing else. You're done and dusted. Maybe blacklisting here and there, but in certain countries, definitely will be able to trade in other spheres. And you must also remember that because you are dealing with entities, legal entities, and not human beings, so to say, what can happen at the end of the day is that I simply close off this particular bank and open another one and still engage and be able to practice and be able to have access to the financial markets in which I was available in or I was playing in. Yes, it's going to dent me a bit because I may need some time to get back to the type of market level I was in at an earlier stage. But I'm still in the game and I'm still understanding how the mechanisms of the game are played, which is why it's easier from one bank to close and another one to open, and they simply say we are going to buy all your book debt so that you are able to continue trading.
Sure. So, Mpumelelo, I mean, we know that Standard Chartered has reached an administrative penalty of 42.7 million in exchange for some of the information, because many of the banks are not necessarily cooperating with the Competition Tribunal. Which other ways could we find in getting to the bottom of this and actually getting the truth?
Well, the one positive way is the one in which they've engaged in now, of saying that have your fellow brothers and sisters tell us how you're manipulating this particular process. They must disclose all so that it's easier for us to prosecute. But you must also note, those are international banks. If you look at the rand-dollar exchange or the rand-pound exchange, whatever that they're offering to pay for them, for sure it's pocket money. So it's not going to really dent the financial activities in which they've engaged in. And certainly, if you do not have the full records of how much money they were able to make, then the sting which is looking for is not available on that particular prospect. So yes, it's going to assist the tribunal in terms of getting down to the bottom of this particular act, but it's going to offer little reprieve in terms of making sure that they're able to move in a positive direction. If it was that maybe half of the local banks have agreed to these particular fines, they've agreed to the collusion in which is being alleged, and there's a way in which processes can then be done to provide some sort of justice or restorative justice, then I would understand that they are going somewhere. But the mere fact that the most individuals that are agreeing or that are consenting to or admitting this particular crime as international banks, it then says to you, our local banks are not interested in it. They are going to fight it up until the highest court in the land and make sure that it goes away. As it stands now, how long has this matter been going on in the competition tribunal? It's a very long time.
Sure, it certainly is a very long time. We certainly do hope that this will reach a consensus at some point and we'll get to the bottom of the truth, and that there will be certain repercussions for those involved in this manipulation. Thank you so much for your analysis. It always is a pleasure. That was legal analyst Mpumelelo Zikalala.